Chapter 5. Heracon! The guests looked uneasily behind him. What was he doing in the land of the immortals? Hadn't he been banished for all of time? Nicholas and Sophia exchanged glances, for they alone knew the conditions of the curse. Heracon would be freed if he could possess the purest and most compassionate heart ever born. But she's only a baby, thought Nicholas. You know him, Sophia replied silently. You know that he will take any chance to attain his freedom. He can't come here, fumed Nicholas. He can try, cautioned Sophia. Sophia turned her black eyes to the anxious crowd. Come, she cried. Come and listen, immortals. Heracon can only enter your presence if you feel fear. When you trust in the power of love and are brave and resolute, he has no purchase on your souls, and he falls back to his tomb in Odo. Remember, forever is not a land of fear. She stepped down from the dais and walked among the immortals, touching a hand here, a shoulder there. There was something in her face that soothed them. Make no mistake, she assured them. Love will prevail. The naiads shook themselves. The fairies and goblins took a deep breath. The knights and princes squared their shoulders. The queens lifted their heads majestically. All of the immortals braced themselves and pushed fear away. It worked. The damp air thinned and faded. The wind-lashed trees calmed, and the night grew still. The stench lifted, and the soft scent of evening primrose floated about. The land of the immortals sighed and returned to itself. Meanwhile, Terra and Tundra loped through the quiet, darkening streets of Forever and out into the forests beyond. Even the woods were eerily empty, for all the witches, sprites, and pixies were at the palace. The two wolves ran, not speaking, toward the gates mounted in the farthest crystal glacier on the outskirts of the land. These, the Amaranthan gates, were wrought from thousands of jewels, a diamond for each immortal who had passed through, set in 100-foot arc of gold, and the light they cast stretched like a bridge from the mortal to the immortal worlds. On the gates were graven the words that served as the legend of the land. Love conquers time, and it was beneath these ancient letters that the newly made immortal souls entered Forever, that magical visitors from Earth were admitted, and that Santa Claus made his ceremonious departure on Christmas Eve. When the jagged sound of metal had torn through Nicholas's gardens, Terra and Tundra had turned to each other with a look of foreboding. There was only one way such a sound could be made. Someone or something was attempting to break down the gates. With a silent, scarcely perceptible nod, the two wolves slipped away at a casual pace until they were beyond sight of the palace, and then ran with ever-increasing speed toward the boundary of Forever. Finally, the gates came into view. They're still holding, affirmed Terra with a breath of relief. The arc of gold glittered in the falling rays of the sun, but there, on one side, the jeweled post had been torn from the ground. It hung, shattered, a good 2 feet above the ground where it had been lodged. The wolves contemplated the wreckage. How did he do it? Tundra muttered. Why did he do it? Terra said sadly. She padded closer to the twisted shards of gold. The gates will open for any immortal. Why did he need to destroy them? A chill wind gusted through the gash in the gate. Terra hesitated and leaned forward to sniff. With a wild howl, the wind ripped through the hole and buffeted the wolf against the rungs of metal. Terra! Called Tundra, panic in his throat. That was enough for Heracon. He seized Tundra's fear and dragged Terra toward the breach in the gates. Frenziedly, she fought, snapping at the wind and digging in her legs, but her defenses were useless against her invisible enemy. Tundra leaped forward to intervene, but he was thrust aside by the gale and lay, pinned and helpless, against the glacier's edge, while his beloved Terra was pulled, howling, through the rent in the metal. One instant she was in the land of the immortals. The next she had fallen forward onto mortal soil. The tearing wind took its vengeance on her, and now subject to mortal wounds, Tara was soon beaten. Her legs collapsed under the battering of the storm, and though she made a last desperate effort to regain forever, she was blinded by the choking dust that whirled around her head. Tundra called her name frantically. She dragged herself farther and farther in the opposite direction, away from the gates, and then slumped hopelessly to one side and lay down, panting, unable to continue. Cloaked in clouds, Herakan looked down contemptuously at Tara's still-breathing frame and, with a flick of his wrist, sent out his birds. In a swarm, they descended on Tara, pecking one another viciously in order to reach the food they were ravenous for. Tundra screamed once and then hid his head. Utterly unaware of the carnage that was occurring at the gates, Sophia continued the ceremony that had been interrupted. Composed and graceful, she approached little Holly, burbling and gurgling in her mother's lap. Leaning down, Sophia fastened a small, intricately designed locket around the child's neck. Then she kissed her soft cheeks. "I did not know that you would need this so soon, my Holly. Stored within this locket is a secret that belongs to the elders. You must never open it, but wear it always. It will keep you safe and guard you all your days. Never forget that the power of love is within you, and it will be your shield. Now you may rest easy, my child, for the strength and wisdom I have given you can never be stolen away. Wear this locket in peace and safety, and let it remind you that you were not alone." Sophia straightened and turned to the guests. "I have also brought you, Holly, the gift of laughter in the form of," Sophia struggled briefly with her cloud-colored robes. The robes appeared to be leaping up and down. "Oh, for heaven's sake, sit still a minute. In the form of, oh, bother. Here she is, and her name is Alexia, and she's not much older than you are, and she has terrible manners." "Don't!" insisted a little gray fox, jumping out of the cloak. Momentarily abashed by the sight of the crowd, Alexia sat down with a thump. Her shyness lasted only a few seconds before it was overcome by her curiosity. She approached Viviana's chair, tail high, and put her forepaws upon the seat. Her golden eyes looked into the baby's soft green ones with unblinking interest. Then she scrambled up into Viviana's lap to join her new friends. "Down, down, Lexi," scolded Sophia, and reluctantly the fox obeyed. Now the other guests had brought forth their gifts for the baby. Gaia approached, bearing a quilt made of rose petals. Shy fairies came in groups, offering fairy lights and magic straws. The fearsome Sphinx gave the baby a small silver capsule that contained the answer to a terrible riddle. The water nymphs had worked for days to make a swan-shaped boat from abalone shells. The dwarves and trolls presented caskets of jewels, as they always did. Unlike the magical beings, whose presents tended to be rather impractical, those who had lived a mortal span presented toys, books, and soft swaddling blankets. Soon the stacks of boxes, chests, and barrels threatened to overwhelm the terrace, and, noticing that Holly was fast asleep and Viviana was shaking with exhaustion, Nicholas brought the celebration to an end. The last goodbyes were over. Melchior and his assistants were clearing off tables and disking over wasted food, while Viviana was resting inside the palace and Holly was nestled in her lacy cloud of a cradle. Out in the cool evening, Nicholas dropped onto a bench and sank into thought. Some time later, he straightened. "Tara," he called, "Tundra, we must make a tour of the periphery." Silence answered him. "Tara, Tundra," he called again. Nothing. This was most unlike them. Nicholas felt a chill of dread run down his spine. "Tara," he said, almost inaudibly. Trying to ignore the dread that clawed in his throat, Nicholas turned on his heel and headed for the stables. Alarmed by his grave face, the stable goblins hastily saddled Vobis, and Nicholas swung onto the horse's back. "The glaciers, Phobos," he commanded briefly. "Begin with the amethyst." Phobos did not have to be urged. With one startling leap, they were on their way, and moments later, the purple glacier, glowing eerily in the starlight, came into view. Silently, Nicholas took stock and moved on. The moon arose and shed its heartless light on the mountainsides, but all was quiet. There was no sign of damage, no evidence of invasion. To overcome the whisper of fear that had followed him for hours, Nicholas assured himself it was likely that Heracon, defeated, had simply turned around and gone back to his prison. But where then were Terra and Tundra? On he rode to the farthest flung outskirts of his kingdom. The crystal glacier came into view, and then the Amaranthan gates. Peering through the gloom, Nicholas saw that the soaring gold gates were still standing, and a worry that he hadn't even realized he was harboring faded. Then, coming closer, he made out the hole blasted in the gatepost. "Faster," he said hoarsely to Phobos. Seconds later, he was striding toward the shattered metal when a dark shape thrown across the ground caught his eye. "Tundra?" There was no answer. Nicholas knelt beside the wolf, stroking his thick, white fur. "What's happened here? Are you wounded? Oh, Tundra, come back!" A long shudder shook the wolf's frame. "I cannot, Your Majesty," Tundra said in a low voice. "You must, my friend," said Nicholas. "I cannot manage without you." There was a silence. "She's dead. Terra?" "Yes." Nicholas was quiet. "How?" he asked finally. "The wind." Tundra's voice shook. "There was a terrible storm. I don't know how, but the wind pulled her against the gates and then out, and Terra got confused. I tried to go after her, but I was held back, sire. I was pinned against the ice. It was evil. It was as though the storm wanted me to watch her die. And then..." Tundra choked. "And then birds swarmed over her." The wolf stopped speaking. Nicholas rose to his feet and walked toward the jeweled bars, then burst through them as though they had been made of nothing more substantial than spiderwebs. He glared into the darkness outside the gates and saw, not far off, Terra's battered body. He approached and knelt down, closing the lids over her eyeless sockets and offering a prayer that her soul would soon forget its suffering. Then he lifted her into his arms and walked swiftly back to his own land, setting her next to Tundra. "Come back to me when you can, Tundra, I beg of you," he said. Slowly he walked toward Phobos. As he climbed into the saddle and turned away, he heard the first of Tundra's howls, and his skin crawled. "Heracon has had his triumph, hasn't he?" thought Nicholas. But why Terra? Terra is nothing to him. It's the pure heart he must have. As he rode, he noticed that the dark trees and silvery glades lining the valley floor seemed curiously empty, as though everyone was hiding. As though something was hiding. A slight rustle of leaves caught his attention. "What if he's here?" thought Nicholas suddenly. "What if he somehow made his way in?" He pulled at the reins and Phobos strained forward. "What if he's inside the palace? Who would know except for Sophia and me? Not even Viviana would be able to recognize him. What if he's crept up the steps? What if he's walking toward the baby's cradle, his hands out, reaching down to touch her?" Terror caught at him. His heart was thundering in his chest. "Home," he said urgently. "Home now." Chapter 6.